Amazing. So welcome everybody to another webinar on localized. Today we're talking about introduction to carbon accounting. We have with us today Caroline Kimani. Caroline is a carbon development specialist with expertise in diverse domains, including carbon markets, nature-based solutions, including rangeland management, carbon policy, energy efficiency, and biodiversity. She has a track record of leading high impact projects across Africa and India with renowned carbon development. At CAPA, Caroline is a carbon technical expert. She holds a master's in rangeland socio-ecology from the University of Nairobi and is committed to advancing high quality climate and nature solutions. Caroline, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Ahmed.
I think just as we, generally speaking, as we kick off our session, I think maybe if you could just give us a little bit of a background, your origins, like where your degrees, what you studied, and how you came to be in the position that you're in today.
Yeah, thanks again, Ahmed. I'm really happy to be on this platform. It's always interesting to speak with young professionals and just share my journey and hopefully someone is able to pick something from it. So I'm Caroline Kimani, as Ahmed mentioned. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I work at a public benefit organization called Climate Action Platform for Africa, so abbreviated as CAPA. And we are an organization that is dedicated to unlocking Africa's potential in climate action through what we call climate positive growth. As a model that we see being able to steer job creation and improving livelihoods across the continent. So my work at CAPA is in carbon. So I'm a carbon technical expert within CAPA, and I contribute to just unlocking those high quality, high integrity carbon markets within the continent and supporting in strategy, policy related kind of work. And my journey to this role really started in projects spanning climate resilience within communities in north and southern Kenya and parts of northern Tanzania. And since my background is rangeland ecology, that really involved working with pastoral communities, marginalized communities within arid and semi-arid lands, supporting them in areas such as regenerative agriculture, rangeland management, climate resilience again, and some bits of work in wildlife conservation. So I did that for about 5 years at the start of my career, working in different organizations, mostly NGOs such as Danish Refugee Council and Africa Dryland Sustainability, Africa Dryland Institute for Sustainability. And then I got into the carbon world through an organization called Sanex Malta, where I supported organizations and companies in their decarbonization plans. And these were mostly companies in the travel industry that were looking to be sustainable. And then I moved on to carbon development. And for those who may not be familiar, carbon development is basically the design and implementation of projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions or remove greenhouse gas emissions. And that could span really any sector across the world as long as it accomplishes that purpose of reduced emissions or removed emissions or avoided emissions. And I worked with carbon developers, what we call carbon developers, which are companies which support organizations to develop carbon projects. So organizations such as Eco Securities and Earth Bank working in projects in Africa and India, nature-based projects and energy efficiency projects. And this is what I leverage now at Climate Action Platform for Africa within our broad work of climate positive growth within the continent.
Wow. You've really been in this space for quite some time. I think, I mean, it's unusual that I meet somebody that's been in the carbon space for, or that has done as such a variety of different work. I think that allows you to give us a perspective that many people don't have. So how many years have you been working in the carbon space, would you say?
It's actually not that long, but it feels like decades because the space changes so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could change in just over a course of a week. But I've been in basically in carbon for the past 5 years,
Okay.
almost 5 years now. Yeah, and most of that has been doing the technical work of developing carbon projects, and that really looks like um running feasibility studies or developing feasibility studies for potential projects
Mhm.
and supporting teams in financing those projects. And then moving on now to the more technical work of registering a carbon project, which includes documentation such as project design documents, which are submitted to carbon standards for registration of carbon projects, and then the monitoring of carbon projects and their verification. Um,
And you
yeah,
mentioned Caroline that so by I think 5 years is a long time in the space because 5 years ago nobody was talking about carbon accounting. So very much
yeah,
the curve. And it's actually very interesting. I will come to that before jumping. You mentioned that the industry changes a lot and very frequently.
yeah,
I wanna maybe touch base on that because that's something I very often hear when talking to people in the carbon scene, and maybe your few years of experience or the 5 years of experience, you've seen a lot of the changes that are happening. So I'd like you just before we continue, if you could just touch on that idea of
yeah,
the frequency of change, how to keep
mhm,
up to date, where to maybe go to find, or where you go to get information about the industry.
yeah,
And then I want to jump into how technology is actually changing that. But I think first, if
yeah,
just let us know about the nature of the changing nature of this industry.
yeah. The roller coaster nature of the industry. Yes.
Love how you say that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's changed quite a while. So when I began basically and that was supporting organizations again in their decarbonization journey. It
Mm,
was very much descriptive and just putting together a wish list for companies and nothing very tangible in terms of data. And before I got now into carbon development and it became super technical. So
mm,
just to give a very quick history of carbon markets and why it sounds very new, although it has been there for a while. So those who are in a bit in touch with the climate change space know that there was an initial global treaty called the Kyoto Protocol in the late 90s, and that is what uh, structured or basically materialized carbon markets. And initially, it was really just the developed countries or those who bear the mostly the responsibility of climate change that were mandated to implement projects that would decarbonize the world. And that then evolved into the Paris Agreement, just because it came to its end of term, but there were also issues initially with carbon markets and the crediting mechanisms then that actually saw the carbon markets crash somewhere around 2011 or so due to a summit that did not, where countries did not agree.
Yeah.
So after the Paris Agreement, which came at around 2015, is when now the discussions became more they became more materialized, I would say, with the new agreement, and with countries agreeing that it is a collective responsibility for everyone to take action in climate. So both developed and developing countries have a responsibility towards decarbonizing their countries.
Yeah.
So now every country or everyone is expected to decarbonize, and so you see now this becoming a frequent conversation, even in the global south, including Africa, and even countries like Kenya now adopting regulations for carbon markets. So that is why it sounds very new, especially if you're in this side of the world, which is great because it drives finance into projects that are actually reducing emissions globally and promoting sustainable development.
Yeah.
So I've seen a couple of changes since I got into the carbon development space, and a lot of it has to do with the integrity of data or the integrity of projects being developed. And part of the reason why the markets crashed earlier on is that the then crediting mechanism was not thought to be robust enough in providing safeguards for communities where they were implemented. So there have been a couple of cases of
Mhm.
projects being really on the spotlight for not equitably sharing benefits
Yeah.
from carbon projects, or on the other side, overcrediting or claiming more than they reduce, which is seen as an integrity issue. So that has been, which will also bring us to a conversation of digitizing the space,
Right.
because as you understand, with digital transformations means that you have more accurate data, you have more transparency within the data, and also just the methods of accounting for how much projects or countries reduce emissions now becomes way more robust and way more transparent. So that is the biggest change I've seen. So with that, there are a lot of startups that have come in to bring in the digitization. So what we call the monitoring, reporting, and verification platforms.
Mhm.
There's a bit more structure now compared to when I joined the industry, because it's very much of a new market. It was not really structured. It still is not perfectly structured. So you can't, most people ask, so where is the market? And it's just very much negotiations between whoever is supplying the credits and buying the credits,
Yeah.
very much over the counter. But now there has been more players coming in, platforms providing such kinds of services, linking all actors within the market. And of course, as I mentioned, regulation, now governments coming in to take up the role, their role in promoting transparency, accountability within the space has also been a huge factor. Yeah, so there has been some ups and downturns
Yeah.
within the market, which have been interesting to witness. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting as consolidation happens, that means, or as more regulation happens, more entities or more business,
Mm,
as you mentioned, start coming into the space, and this creates opportunities for
yeah.
people our learners that are attending today. Um, uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
and on that note, I think maybe one of the things that we all hear about AI, we all hear about machine learning. Could you maybe tell us how AI, machine learning, is transforming the carbon accounting practices in Africa? And based on
Yeah.
that trend, what skills are needed for people to develop to have an edge coming into this market?
Yeah, we've seen AI and machine learning are really play a huge role and really revolutionize some of these
Mm.
um projects. And one aspect is just the data management aspect, which is a huge aspect of carbon projects. And it's huge because the projects have to be audited. So they have to be registered, they have to be audited by third parties, which are called validation and verification bodies. And data is very central to carbon projects because every claim of reduced emissions we make has to be verified, it has to be validated and verified. And just to make it a bit more relatable, it can be really across any sector, from forestry to transport, so electric mobility to households in clean cooking and solar home systems.
Yeah.
Basically, any industry um, that is able to reduce their footprint
Mhm.
to the right scale, at least is viable for carbon credits. So AI has come in one to improve the accuracy there, to improve the accuracy, the efficiency of data management. So, for example, on particular projects I've worked on, is that you would, for example, for nature-based projects,
Mhm.
a huge aspect is remote sensing.
Remote
So
sensing?
that yeah, remote
Cool.
sensing.
Okay.
So if you need to assess the changes in an ecosystem, then you monitor that remotely through satellite images, which you analyze.
Mhm.
And over the years, AI and machine learning has improved the process of handling such
Yeah.
large and huge data.
Yeah.
And for carbon projects in land-based settings, that is a requirement to use remote sensing, to use the best available resolution of remote sensing.
Yeah.
So, for example, at CAP-A, we've collaborated with I know, companies, Downforce Technologies,
Mhm.
which is also leveraging such digital technologies in regenerative agriculture to monitor the carbon changes within that ecosystem. So that would include all the above ground and soil carbon stock changes. In the cases of, for example, clean cooking, there are companies that are using Internet of Things just to make sure that the data is collected on a real-time basis.
Yeah.
So the amount of time that is used in cooking by a certain household is able to be generated on a real-time basis. And so that reduces the time that goes into having to go into households, collecting surveys and so on.
Yeah.
And then in cases, for example, there are projects that include biochar production. So those will take waste and produce a charcoal-like um, substance that is able to lock in carbon in the long term. So
Yeah.
those projects also using censored data, so using sensors on their production units to provide real-time data. So digital, there's still a huge space or appetite for digitizing the space in any carbon project, really. And even what projects rely on for their registration and verification or the registries, the carbon standards. So if you've had the likes of Vera Gold Standard and so on, are also moving in to allow methods of accounting that allow um, digital use
Yeah.
of data. So yeah, there's a huge space, and from a personal perspective, the network within Carbon has really grown, not just in here in Nairobi, but also across the continent, across the globe. When I started out, it was very few
Yeah.
experts, at least where I am, but they have really proliferated, which is really exciting to see.
That is actually very exciting. And please let me try to simplify it and let me know if my thinking is accurate. So you have carbon
Yeah.
accounting, or you have initiatives that companies are doing and governments are doing. These initiatives, you need
Mhm.
to calculate the impact of these initiatives. And to do that,
Yeah.
you need carbon accounting, right?
Exactly.
Understanding how
Yeah.
to do that calculations so that when you do that calculation, you're able to submit it to a government or regulatory body that confirms, yes, these calculations
Yes.
are to standard, and yes, we approve, then you can do other things with that. Nowadays, the technology where technology is heading is collecting all of this data that you need to
Hmm.
use to analyze and kind of I guess calculate the carbon footprint. Technology
Yeah.
is heavily involved in that at this starting to be
Yes.
more heavily in terms of Internet of Things you mentioned. You mentioned machine learning.
Yeah.
You mentioned artificial intelligence. You mentioned sensor technology, right? So, and I'm reiterating this because oftentimes I get asked by people, particularly in the technical fields,
Hmm.
how do I get involved in the
Yeah.
open space, right? I
Yeah.
think you've really very cleverly showcased like the entire ecosystem and how the technology element today is becoming more and more important. Other than
Yeah.
technology, right? Because there are people with
Hmm.
non-technical backgrounds, so finance,
Yeah.
marketing, supply chain, right? So people in those non-tech, so I guess technical or non-environmental backgrounds, how can
Hmm.
people in that area transition into carbon accounting roles? Right? What
Yeah.
perspectives do you think they can bring into the equation?
Yeah. And that's a good question. Because yeah, we need to highlight that carbon projects are very much multidisciplinary.
Hmm.
So while my background is in ecology, you would need a whole team, a whole diverse team, to bring a carbon project to life. Um,
Yeah.
so there's a place for a lot of really a lot of professionals. So if you're looking, for example, at a carbon project, and also a carbon project might also just be a very narrow way of looking at it, because it's a whole ecosystem, from the corporates that are trying to decarbonize their operations and therefore need to buy these credits to offset their footprints. And then on the other side, there are those projects that are reducing emissions and therefore supply credits, and are actually happening on the ground, with communities that also need to be run.
Yeah.
So if you think of, on the side of corporates, there are sustainability roles that are needed for a corporate. So for example, Microsoft, Apple, Netflix, whatnot,
Mm.
who need a sustainability team to be able to account for their carbon footprint.
Yeah.
So in that case, carbon accounting looks like how much of operations are emitting greenhouse gases, and how much is that. Then what can we do to reduce those emissions? What residual emissions then we can offset through projects that are climate friendly. So in that case, the carbon accounting is not very different, but just a bit simplified. So you'd look at things like greenhouse gas protocol, and so on, that oversee carbon accounting for such multinational corporates. Then on the other side is projects that are climate friendly and supplying these carbon credits, and those are the ones that can span any sector. So if it's a nature-based project, you definitely need ecologists, biologists, you need foresters.
Yeah.
Then you would need project managers, because these are actual projects that have milestones, that have stakeholders that need managing. Then you would need your supply chain, because they would obviously need to source some items. You also need, of course, so the entire vertical chain of running a project
Yeah.
is necessary. So if it's reducing soil organic carbon emissions or removing soil organic carbon from the atmosphere, then you need your soil scientists.
Yeah.
You need also your remote sensing specialists. Again, your machine learning comes in there.
Yeah.
So it's a whole, especially on the carbon project side, it's a whole vertically integrated system that requires all those experts. So you also need social experts because there are projects that have community stakeholders, and you would also need to manage them as stakeholders, but also ensure that they are the impacts to those communities from the projects are positive. And at a high level now, because this is also a market that involves countries and
Yeah.
international discourse.
Yeah.
So there is also room for policy experts who are in touch with um, generally what's happening in the global space, discussions around conference of parties, which we refer to as COP, like what's going on in Baku currently, and translating all that knowledge into regulatory frameworks
Mhm.
and into policy frameworks within countries.
Yeah.
So it's a whole
Big.
there's room for everyone. And I think what's important is to leverage your skills, so the skills that you already have, and then layer the basic or foundational knowledge of carbon markets,
Mhm.
carbon projects.
Mhm.
Um, and so you can find a niche for yourself within the market space. And although it's a very new space, so it's not very easy to come across training programs.
Yeah.
But yeah, platforms like obviously localized, which are providing that kind of knowledge. There's also Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, which is putting together a hub, pulling materials together to give you that foundational knowledge of carbon markets.
Yeah.
Another key pillar is networking, since it is a nascent industry, um, just within where you are. For example, in Nairobi, in Kenya, the networking carbon has really grown
Mhm.
through platforms such as Nairobi Climate Network, which has also expanded into Tanzania, South Africa, and so on. So looking for those professional network platforms is really important, and growing those networks to understand how the space is changing, because it does really change what's new, what are the opportunities there. And I think on the last bit is just there are reports that are released usually at the end of every year or at the beginning of the year, by different companies, such as Silvera, also Africa Carbon Market Initiatives, started to do so. So subscribing to those newsletters and reports is important to keep abreast with what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Could you give us an example? So I received a few questions actually that I wanted to
Mhm.
address. I think the first one just very clearly, these network, like do you have like certain profiles that you follow on LinkedIn or on social media? Which networks? I mean, I'm assuming there are many
Mhm.
networks out there. Which networks do you subscribe to newsletters from? I think that
Yeah.
can you share maybe some of that information with
Mhm.
us?
Yeah, I can share off the top of my head, and I'm always happy to follow up with an email with anything more.
Please.
But on LinkedIn, so one is an Nairobi Climate Network, which we are also a member of, as CAP-A, Climate Action Platform for Africa, and that brings together all professions within carbon, meeting regularly, monthly basis, or it has changed now since it has grown really big. And so that is one way of I have really connected with people in the space. There's also platforms like Jobs in Carbon on LinkedIn. if you just want to yeah, if you want to keep up with what jobs are coming up, what are the opportunities? Yeah, so Africa Carbon Markets Initiative as well is also a platform that shares those industry insights,
Nice.
especially if you're interested with what's happening within Africa. Then there are market insights companies such as Silvera. There is Abatable, which are also they are also what you would call well, they aggregate
Yes. Okay.
projects that are supplying and also aggregate with the demand, just connecting players within the market. There's also ecosystem marketplace if you're interested in nature-based solutions. And
Mhm.
there's a newer and high in demand set of projects called engineered removals. So these are highly tech-based direct air capture um, batch type of projects, enhanced rock weathering. So those would be, for example, CDR.FYI. I can put some links on the chat or share on email. No worries.
Perfect. You could share with
Yes.
us on by email some links.
Yeah.
We can definitely then share them with everybody that has joined us today. You mentioned a lot
Mm.
of jobs, a lot of employment. Sometimes people, especially people that are coming into the space new, that might not have a lot of experience in the space. Sometimes it's a bit
Yeah.
of a struggle of how do I get that first bit of experience that then allows
Hmm.
to enter
Yeah.
that require some experience. I love
Yeah.
that's a question that I got also. So I'd love to hear just your thoughts on that. How do I go about that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting one because it's chicken and egg. You
Exactly.
need the experience to join, and you're also looking to build that experience. Um, I think one thing is again to just acquaint yourself with the basic knowledge in carbon just online, so that you understand what really the space is about and how you can contribute, and then just through networks. I honestly got into carbon development through through networking. Um, and I really learned on the job. So there's also the aspect of it's a new industry. You bring in your foundational knowledge. For example, in my case, that was ecology. In your case, that could be anything.
Mhm.
And just that initiative of just reading materials available online, even though they're very scanty. And um, now there are way more materials than we began. So that's also a really good thing. Just reading reports and
Yeah.
that level of self-education is important in carbon markets, and it doesn't stop again because it's quickly evolving. And yeah, I'd
I think
say
that's very helpful,
reach out
Caroline.
to your networks. Yeah,
That's very helpful actually, because I think, and please, so if I can summarize, because the market is new, you're not expected to have a ton of experience in the industry, right?
yeah,
However,
exactly.
because the industry crosses multiple other industries, come in
Yeah,
with foundational knowledge and be well
yeah,
read around what it means to be in the carbon space, right? I think that's the
absolutely.
conclusion. You did mention networking, and I want
Yeah.
to, and I'm not gonna dig into that because it's a little bit off topic, but I know that networking in a new industry is important. So if you can
Hmm.
give us two pieces of advice on how
Hmm.
to network within the space
Yeah.
for our audience.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting one. How to network. Um,
Just tips of not
so
how
so
tips for what people can do. I mean, it's
yeah,
tips of what people can do.
yeah. Absolutely. So one, just identify those professional networks around you. Some of them tend to be very informal, just people meeting for drinks, and that's probably growing. And also just reaching out to people on LinkedIn. You'd be amazed at how many people are willing to just chat with you and also connect with you. I've connected with several people just on LinkedIn, and yeah, and through that you also get referrals. And I think the goal should just be to to learn and to know people within the space and understand what opportunities there are for you. And because it's a growing industry, it means that if you have read up something on this space, you probably have something to share. Just because it's a lot to keep up with. It's very diverse, and so just keeping yourself educated, you find that you have more to share than
Yes.
you think. Yeah, I think yeah, the industry has really stretched me in terms of networking. Yeah, gotten me out of that bubble, but I found it to be very interesting and also refreshing just meeting people from different walk of life and
I think you're, oh,
parts of
sorry, Caroline, I think you're cutting up a little bit.
the
Caroline?
globe.
Oh,
Working on better vision. Oops.
okay, I think you're
Can you
back.
hear me now?
Yes, you're back now. Oh, we lost Caroline. Okay, no problem. So please, everybody, bear with us while Caroline logs back in. Oh, I think she's back online. Yes.
Sorry, Ahmed. Yeah,
No
I got
worries.
kicked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I wanted to we cut off the last section. Do you want to give us a quick recap
Hmm.
of the points that you were the point that you're trying?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if I remember that correctly, I was talking about just you reaching out to professional connections on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
just dropping them messages and connecting with them. Yeah, and I was saying, yeah, with just reading up a few stuff on carbon, you'd be surprised that you have more to share than you think, and people would be glad to engage in conversation with you. Um, yeah,
And I will leave people that are here today with a little bit of advice. This is something that we've discussed with Caroline, and we've discussed generally with experts that come on to localized. One of the Sometimes it can feel a little intimidating to just randomly reach out to somebody on LinkedIn or on localized, less so on localized because we're expecting it from our experts are expecting. But I think one key thing, if you do attend a session of Caroline or of somebody else, when you do reach out to them, let them know that you attended their session on localized. It immediately creates a connection, right? Immediately, so Caroline already can associate you as somebody that has taken the time to register and attend an event. And typically, we found that that is very useful when doing outreach to experts. So just a recommendation from our side. Caroline, I want to continue on with some of our questions because I think
yeah.
in the field, you mentioned that there's a lot of there obviously a lot of opportunities, and you mentioned that there's a lot of new companies coming into the space. I want to talk a little bit about that. So, can you tell us what opportunities do you see for entrepreneurship at the intersection of carbon
Mhm.
accounting and other emerging fields? An example
Yeah.
that comes to mind is generative agricultural or circular economy, but I mean,
Mhm.
whatever you're comfortable talking about.
Yeah. yeah, the startup ecosystem within carbon has really grown over the past few years. And initially, it started with what we call um, carbon developers, and these are companies that support organizations with projects on the ground to do the technical work, but also will get financing either through debt equity and so on. And then it also grew now to companies supporting buyers to make decisions on what projects they are going to invest in. And there have been so many other startups also on the digital aspect. So as the market grew, there was an increased demand for high integrity projects,
Mhm.
high quality projects that had proven data. And that is when the demand for what we call digital MRV, which is digital monitoring, reporting, and verification. Companies, so that could be remote sensing companies, it could also be blockchain companies that are also providing platforms to uh, to um, to make the credits more accessible. Yeah, I'm obviously avoiding blockchain jargon before I embarrass myself. Um, and then there is machine learning as well. There's also platforms now that are aggregating supply, so the supply of credits from projects, but also aggregating demand from buyers, and therefore making it easy for the system, the ecosystem actors to connect and trade within the market. There's also been companies that come in as brokers as well. So they would buy and resell in the market.
Mhm.
There's also been consulting companies basically coming up, just doing the technical work of either supporting corporates to do their carbon footprinting,
Mhm.
um, or or doing or supporting projects that are developing um, their their operations on the carbon side, so supporting them with accounting for carbon, and others just organizations, companies supporting governments in that transition into regulating carbon markets, but also since countries are mandated as well to keep a registry of all projects within their jurisdiction. And it has been such a technical space to navigate even for countries.
Mhm.
So that has also unlocked entrepreneurship spaces um, within the continent. So there is just within the carbon development space, there's a whole breadth of uh, startups that could come out of that, given that there are many sectors encompassed within that. So whether it's e-mobility, whether it's engineered removals, um, whether it's forestry companies starting up developing projects, aggregating farmers into regenerative agricultural projects or agroforestry projects, and so on. So they're limitless opportunities.
Amazing.
Really,
It's a lot of
yeah.
opportunities. And speaking of opportunities, I think other than startups, I'd like to maybe shift to more practical things or more on the ground things that maybe people can actually do. So I want to shift a little bit to talk about how the CAP A is working. If you could let us know how they're working to make carbon accounting and sustainability careers more accessible and appealing to young
Mhm.
professionals. And then maybe if you could,
Yeah.
are there any mentorship programs that are available? Are there any training programs available through your organization?
Yeah. So at CAPE, we have been running an accelerator program
Cool.
this year in partnership with Africa Climate Ventures and FSD Africa. And the accelerator program has brought together a set of startups within Africa.
Okay.
And we were biased towards companies that are early on in their carbon development stages, and very early on in their business model in carbon. So we selected eight companies, and these companies were developing projects in biochar, regenerative agriculture, and some bit of agroforestry
Nice.
in excuse me, in East. We had East and West Africa, East Central and West Africa.
Okay.
And we also had the DMRV companies, the digital monitoring and reporting and verification companies.
Mhm.
So we had companies like Tollbee, Shamba Network,
Mhm.
which are DMRV companies supporting projects in monitoring and reporting carbon projects through remote sensing, through AI, and blockchain. And we also had the likes of Trikoko in Ghana, and Oko Forest in Ghana. So we took them through a phase of technical support through experts and webinars through experts, and then moved on to a stage of mentorship with experts within the industry, and then finally sponsored them for carbon conference. So we see that as one of the models where we unlock that potential within the African carbon market ecosystem,
Mhm.
to build African professionals, and to just act as a springboard for those startups so they can scale and basically multiply those opportunities. Yeah, we've also been working on benefit sharing mechanisms as one of the uh, concerns within the market, on integrity again,
Mhm.
and seeing how we can unlock more equity and fairness within the ecosystem in Africa. So we released a report on rethinking benefit sharing mechanisms in Africa, which I'm also happy to share.
Nice.
Um, yeah, so we also are really actively looking at ways to collaborate with different partners, in order to scale such initiatives in a broader way, and further within the ecosystem, through capacity building initiatives.
Nice.
So we hopefully will have more in the pipeline towards that, as we seek such collaboration. Yeah.
Amazing. Let's connect on that separately, by the way. I think I might have an opportunity
Yeah.
with localized that could work for that sentence. So,
Yeah,
so
sure.
entrepreneurships, great opportunities available, a lot of space available. There's support given to entrepreneurs that come up with innovative and creative idea through initiatives like the one you just mentioned. How about for people that are not maybe intrinsically entrepreneurs but want to work
Mm-hmm.
as an employee, right? So, what advice
Mm-hmm.
would you give to students about approaching
Mm-hmm.
potential employers in the carbon accounting field, and how can they
Yeah.
effectively communicate their passion or qualifications for that space or
Yeah.
job?
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, it's important to realize, just like you briefly summarized, Ahmed, is that there's a place for almost every profession. So understanding the leverage you can bring to a carbon project,
Mhm.
um, and that could be just again looking at what are these startups within these professional networks, and what are they doing, and how could your skills be leveraged within such a setup, and having that basic, I think most employers would prefer employees that already understand how what carbon markets are and how they operate, so that you don't have to onboard and train on the basics, right? And that is really available, so that what you would be learning on the job is the much deeper technical aspects of how you can work within the space. So I think you can only understand how your skills can be leveraged by understanding just a bit of the foundational aspects of
Of the
carbon markets.
uh,
Um,
yes.
yeah, and so understanding this is how I can use my I can use my digital skills, my social skills, my ecology skills, and so on, and making the connect. Because most of the time it's usually very the connection is quite direct. But people are intimidated by the jargon within carbon markets, which is very understandable. It can be very technical, and it looks very elusive, but
Yeah.
really every profession is able to contribute to the ecosystem. Yeah.
Amazing. So I think just I want to just encourage anybody that has any additional questions to please put them in the chat. But I think like just as until we receive that, I think one of the questions that I often think about, right, is ethical considerations
Yeah.
versus the needs of industry and carbon accounting markets. So I think
Yeah.
as a final question from my side before you wrap up, as the carbon markets in Africa grows, what ethical
Hmm.
considerations should young professionals be aware of, particularly regarding the impact on local communities and indigenous rights? And I believe you have worked in this space, um, or you have some experience in this space. So if you can give us your thoughts around that, that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. Because it is a concern within the market. That a couple of projects have been on the limelight for the exact same issues on the inclusivity and the fairness one of benefit sharing within carbon projects. Also the level of stakeholder engagement that's undertaken within these projects. So especially projects that are heavy on community engagement, for example, where you have forests that communities directly depend on, or you're working with farmers, or you're distributing household energy efficiency products like clean cooking
Mhm.
um, products and so on. So one of the key issues has there been adequate engagement of the stakeholders? Do they understand what they signed up for?
Yeah.
And there can be very legal and sensitive issues within carbon projects because one of those processes, since communities don't have the technical expertise and the finance to be able to register a carbon project
Yeah.
and see it through monitoring, so usually they would transfer these rights to, for example, a carbon developer to take up those roles for them. And there's the question of do they understand what they signed up for within those agreements? Are the terms within those agreements fair for them?
Mhm.
And most of the time we found that they don't have enough knowledge to know what's fair for them. So
Of the individuals
um, and it,
themselves, the
yeah,
community, individuals within the community. Okay.
yes, the communities themselves.
Right.
And even within communities, there's like aspects of uh, elite capture. So a few individuals who are well versed might take
Great.
advantage of
Yeah.
these benefits to the detriment of communities. And
Mm.
those were some of our findings while we were undertaking the benefit sharing mechanisms
Yeah.
work with FSD Africa. And then we proposed principles for benefit sharing within carbon projects. So transparency, accountability, fairness, and good governance within communities. So there already is a space for legal professionals, for CSOs that work to cushion communities against such incidences. So there are also opportunities for those kinds of professionals make that space a bit more transparent,
Yeah.
a bit more equitable for communities.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's also important that as professionals get into the space, also they understand what are the concerns within the market, what are the risks of certain projects. And even when you're supporting, for example, buyers in getting in sourcing carbon credits, that you also understand that that level of due diligence is important.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, apart from the community, the aspects of projects being accused of overstating their carbon benefits.
Mhm.
So claiming more than they actually have done, which means that they get more revenues than they should have.
Yeah.
And that means uh, the world has more emissions than people are claiming it to have.
Yeah.
So those ethical considerations are important to consider, and also just align yourself with
Mhm.
organizations that actually follow those principles of equity and fairness. Yeah,
Amazing. And I think there is one question that I'll ask you to maybe send it in the email. You said you would send an email of some resources. I think one of the
yeah,
question, if you could add on to that, certifications that you feel are important for the
hmm
continent, and if there
hmm
are any bodies that issue carbon accounting certifications
hmm
in Africa. I think that's something that would be useful for some of our attendees. We are at time, Caroline, so I'm conscious
oh,
of time. Um,
yeah,
Thank you very much for your time today. This has been hugely informative. I will ask you to leave our audience with maybe that are might be interested to coming into the space with maybe one or two pieces of advice of
yeah.
actionable things that they can do today to better prepare themselves for the journey into the carbon industry.
I think it's a great industry to be in. Um, One, because of I think for me it's always a question of impact. So do the work I do have does the work I do have impact? So whether for nature, for biodiversity, for communities,
Yeah.
and working within the space has made me see that intersection of just climate benefits, but also benefits for communities and for nature. So um, I think that's a good drive to have. And also that also becomes your north star as you select which organizations to work with, to align yourself with. And also just it's also great just seeing the African expertise grow within the space.
Mhm.
It has been really great to connect with even more and more African experts that are getting into the space, which was not the case when I started.
Yeah.
So we are seeing more startups, but also more African experts. So I think yeah, I think it's a good time to get into the space and support that transition into decarbonization just within whatever country you are, whatever sector you're in. Yeah, and you can see yourself as bringing change, but also bringing your skills and knowledge into a space that really needs it.
Amazing. Those are fantastic final words. Karine, thank you so much for your time today. I've enjoyed hosting you in today's session. I'm sure our audience has benefited very much from what you've had to say. Thank you very much for your
Thank you
time
so much.
and have a
Thank
good.
you so much, Ahmed. I've had so much fun. Yeah, and happy to follow up with that email.
Please, yes, I'll be looking forward to receiving it.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Have a
Thanks, everyone.